Greetings everyone, welcome back to Blade Bias. I just finished 100%ing Risk of Rain 2 on Steam, for those of you that care, so that's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about that. But for those of you who don't care, let's talk about my week with the Vulp Pro, because it was a week. It was a pretty good week, can't even lie. Before we get into that, I'm going to start off by just trying to be as transparent as possible, because while these aren't, review videos per se, people still use them as purchasing advice, which I think is really crazy. I don't know how I feel about that in my head, but at this point, there's really no fighting it. As much as I talk about how Blade Bias isn't reviews, if you use it for purchasing advice, or if you use my opinions for purchasing advice, I can't really stop you. So in the interest of being as transparent as possible, this product was provided for free by Nabalis, and I am friends with the people who designed it. That's how it is. I'm still going to try and be as impartial as I can. That's usually my MO. But I got it for free, and I'm friends with the people who designed it. If you want to see the opinions of people who can't say that, go watch. There are so many videos in the Vulp Pro. There's plenty of other opinions that you can go to. So if you think that my opinion is invalid for those facts, it's totally fine. Go check out any of the other wonderful videos on the Vulp Pro. But for the rest of you, let's get into what I think of the Vulp Pro, because spoiler alert, I like it a lot, but there are a few nitpick problems that I have with it that I want to talk about, because I think it is important that you're aware of them before you make a purchase decision. So let's start off with the good, because the good is very good. This thing is a complete and total upgrade from the original Vulp in pretty much every way, and the biggest one, in my opinion, is grip. This balisong is very grippy. This G10 is very well implemented. It doesn't feel too chalky or anything, and despite the G10 only taking up a small amount of the surface area right here, it provides a shocking amount of grip for any trick that you could realistically want to do on it. And even the places that don't have G10, like the jimping, I think this jimping is much better than the original Vulp, despite it being the same design. And that comes down to the polished finish on the outside, which I think is great. I hate Bead Blast. The Bead Blast went away. Double thumbs up in my book. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. The other way that this upgraded was the balance. The balance is better. I don't think there is anyone out there who could say that this flips worse than the Vulp. Okay, people could say that. I don't think there's anyone out there who currently is saying that, because this, oh my gosh, it kind of embarrasses the Vulp. I'm not going to lie. I get the Vulp is like a cheap beginner balisong, but this thing is just way better in every way. Chaplains and rollovers are insanely good. It feels smooth. It feels refined from the original Vulp. This is a balisong that just flips so much better. Now, it does sort of suffer, if you're like me and you're a tip weight fiend, it does sort of suffer in in fans and choker fans, but I am more than willing to give up that trade-off. I'm willing to give up the fans and choker fans because they still feel pretty good for the improved chaplains and rollovers and the improved momentum carrying of the Vulp Pro, thanks to these weights at the bottom, which we'll get to those later, but it's a huge win. It carries plenty of momentum. It flips incredibly good. Not as handle biased as I was expecting, hearing Will and Brandon talking about it, but I am very, very happy with it. A little more handle biased than I usually swing towards, but honestly, I've been really enjoying the Vulp Pro. It's consistent. I've been able to do things like parabolics way easier than I have been on other balisongs. Of course, now that I say that, there we go. I'm not going to be able to do them. There we go. Perfect. I have been getting those down so much more consistently on the Vulp Pro, and my flipping is it just feels good. The Vulp Pro, I think, flips very, very well, and it's very comfortable too, except for a few parts. But again, we will get to that later. Now, talk about the design, because I think this is awesome. The way that they implemented the G10, the build and all of that, I think is spectacular. It's incredible to have a balisong that is this unique and cool with the G10 and the aluminum at this price point. which, while I'm talking about the price point, I was very surprised to see the community discourse over this thing, because there are a lot of people saying that it's way too expensive. And I gotta be honest, I don't get it. I've had a few conversations with people that absolutely have valid complaints. I'm not going to say that everyone who thinks the Vulp Pro is overpriced is invalid, but in a lot of cases that I've observed in different discords and different forums, I really do think it's just the hate for Will and Brandon shining through. Because there are some people who are on critical levels of cope when they talk about this thing. Let's look at this thing objectively right now. This is $140 from a Chinese manufacturer, sure, but let's not pretend like there aren't other Chinese manufacturers in this hobby. People applaud the Orion, and while that is, that is absolutely an outlier in the value department, because there's nothing that comes even close to touching the Orion in terms of value. That's a Chinese-made balisong. There are also some makers out there who outsource to factories in China. So there's a lot of people out there who are like, I wouldn't pay that much for a Chinese-made balisong, and then they turn around and they applaud someone who maybe outsources their products to China. So there's a little bit of a double standard there, which I'm not saying is wrong. Like, if you're not aware, I'm not saying you're in the wrong if you're not aware of something like that, but that's kind of why I think it goes into dipping into like, I don't like Will and Brandon, I don't like the Vulp Pro. But again, not everyone. If there are people who have valid complaints, but side tangent aside, let's look at this thing objectively. $140, 7075 aluminum, unique G10 integration, all of the add-ons that come in the box, a case that carries 3 balisongs, the bite handle markers, the tools, hardware, etc., for $140. I think that, I'm not going to say it's a stellar deal, but I think that is well worth the price. Well worth the price. Anything in the same vein as that, 70-75 for less than $150, we're looking at like the Vortex and the Akuma Matata. The Vortex isn't available that often, but it's very good from what I hear. And the Akuma Matata was a balisong that I did not really vibe with at all. So I think the Vulp Pro is, I would pay $140 for this. I think $140 is more than fair, especially because it's a YouTuber's product at the end of the day. And in any other scenario, that would come with a huge markup. I think this is a fair price, even if Will's name wasn't attached to it. So that's my side tangent about the price over with. Yeah. Now, let's get into some of the things that I don't necessarily like about the Vulp Pro, because I've been very positive so far. I love the design. I love the way it flips. What I don't love is the little nitpicks. I think my biggest one is the comfort in this area specifically. These 3 lines right here on the side. These rub against the top of my index finger like no tomorrow. You can see it's red up here. I've got like a little callus forming right here. And when I first flipped this thing for the first few days, there was a ton of irritation up at the top of my index finger. Those little 3 lines right there are so deep and they dig into my finger so much. It just kind of annoys me, especially because a lot of the time I'm doing tricks where I have to stop the momentum of the balisong and reverse it specifically in this spot. Things like this ricochet that I do off of my finger where you go into the underhand thumb rollover. Or when we're going here, I have to stop it right there and then I go back around into the thumb rollover. Like when I go into the whip rollover. Well, maybe not that specific whip rollover, but one of the variations I do for the whip rollover, you have to stop the momentum and it just digs into my fingers and it's so uncomfortable. It is kind of a nitpick because, it's not all the time. Maybe that's just a skill issue. I got to learn how to flip better, but it is still a big problem for me, especially. Now, another big problem that I have is that my unit specifically, and Brandon told me that I was the only one that he had heard of who has this issue, so maybe I'm blowing this a little bit out of proportion. So I'm giving you that info. Brandon said I was the only one he's heard of that had this issue, but I was not able to get my pivots at the end of the handles here out whatsoever. Short of pulling out a hammer and just smashing the thing, I could not get these pivots out. You take the screw out, and I was pounding it on my desk pretty hard. Nothing was happening. Even with the screws out, these pivots spin like they're mostly tightened down. You know that last like half a turn when you're tightening a bushing balisong and it's like there's a fair amount of resistance there? That's what the pivots feel like with no screws on the other side all the time. And that is a huge issue because of how these things are going to be used. Now, Nabalis doesn't recommend that you take them apart, but a lot of people are. I've seen a lot of really cool builds where people dye the G10. So if you're getting this balisong to mod it, and you happen to have the same issue that I have, which, I mean, statistically, from what I've heard, hopefully you won't, but if you have that issue, you won't be able to customize it like you wanted to, and I think that's a big problem. That combines with the fact that the initial batch had a larger than expected handle gap, and Nabalis obviously has a little bit of QC working on to do. Now, I'm not exactly saying like, oh, it's terrible, whatever. Again, if it's true that really I'm the only one with this issue, such as, I'm not saying Brandon's lying, I'm saying that maybe there's someone else out there that has the same issue that just doesn't have an Instagram or something. They're not part of the community in the same way. But if that's true, it's a very small percentage, but it's still something that should be addressed and should be double checked to make sure that doesn't happen. Especially with the oversight and the handle gap. The reality of it is, this is a product that's being designed by someone and manufactured by someone on the other side of the world. So there might be issues or disconnects or miscommunications down the chain. One big one being that the instructions in the box are for the original Vulp, which isn't the biggest deal in the world. I don't really care about that personally. But some people are going to want to know how to take care of the G10. I think that's an important thing to put on that instruction manual. So there's going to be some things to iron out the kinks with. Even with that said, I know some people are going to say, but you said it was worth the money, but then there's these problems with, even with those issues, I think this is worth the money, genuinely. I mean, people are still buying Nautiluses for crying out loud, and some of those Nautilus can't even flip. You can't flip them because it's a whole thing. Anyway, that's something to keep in mind. Not a huge issue for me because I've got the black G10. I don't plan on taking it apart or anything like that. But it's something to be slightly aware of. And my other major complaint, not major complaint even, I'm getting used to it, but if they just reduce this handle gap by like just a little, like even just to that much, I think this thing would feel a little bit better. I have small hands. I'm abnormally susceptible to large handle gaps, and I don't really like them that much. So that's one change that I would make. But my biggest complaint by far, definitely this right here. It's just very sharp. It's very irritating to my poor little fingers. And that's pretty much my week with the Vulp. Other than the few nitpicks that I had, I think this is a really, really stellar product. I'm very, very excited to have it in the community. And it's one that I highly recommend. Now, I will say I don't really know where this stands as far as an upgrade path from the Vulp. Because I think if you're buying a Vulp, chances are you're not going to go immediately to something that costs $140 after that. I think it's much more reasonable to upgrade to like an Orion. You're spending $30 more. Sometimes, maybe even $10 in some cases with the Orion. But I think that is a much more realistic upgrade path. But if you're someone who really likes the Vulp and you're like, man, I wish this flipped a little better. I mean, here it is. And I think this is just great for anyone who's looking maybe in the $150 price range. Like, this definitely beats out the Arctic for me, which used to be kind of my recommendation to beginners, because it was like, here's this handle bias thing that I learned on, and I was really successful learning on. So that's what I would recommend to you. That definitely gets replaced by the Vulp Pro now. But it's kind of in a no man's land where, like, I wouldn't recommend it as a first balisong, and I wouldn't recommend it as an upgrade path from a Vulp, unless you just really don't want to get an Orion. Or you really like handle bias, because the Orion is fairly neutral. But either way, as an addition to a collection, I think it's really nice to have this unique design accessible at such a low price. I think it's great. So that's my week with the Vulp Pro. Few issues, but overall, incredibly positive. Good job, Will. Good job, Brandon. Good job, Nabalis. And good job, you, for making it through this year. This is the last time we'll talk in 2023. I hope 2024 is either as good to you as 2023 was, if 2023 was a good year for you. If 2023 wasn't a good year for you, I hope next year is better. That was a really long-winded way to say Happy New Year. And I will see you on the 2nd, because I usually try and upload on even days just to keep myself straight. So, Happy New Year. I'll see you guys in 2024. And I tell you what, I'm very excited for 2024 because we got some, I say this every time, but we got some pretty big stuff coming in the mail to check out on Blade Bias. So, I'll see you all then. Have a good one. Have a safe New Year. And I'll see you all next year. Peace out.